The first purpose of the checklist is defining the valuation problem. Generally, the valuation problem is attributable to the residue because the severance of the part taken from what was the whole property may have affected the residue property. To define the valuation problem requires people knowledgeable in eminent domain valuation processes, knowledgeable in plan reading and legal concepts of compensability, to assess the impact of the taking on the residue. This may require an understanding of local zoning ordinances, an understanding of utilities at the site or that are reasonably close to the property, an understanding of the highest and best use of the whole before the taking and of the residue after the taking, an understanding of the effect of proximity or impact on parking or of internal circuity or of access to and from the property, or of what was taken and what remains, or of differences in size and frontage related to function of the property, and many, many other issues of potential damage. An understanding that the residue is always valued in its severed condition before any proven cost to cure is even considered. So, what is a complicated valuation problem? The appraisal valuation problem is considered complex or complicated if there's any hint that the residue suffers a diminution or a loss in value. Brings up the second question, what is a diminution in value? Let's look at the next slide for an example. What we're looking at now is a 5-unit commercial strip center that's typical of many. Parking is in the front. And what we're doing on this property is we are taking a WL acquisition, which is represented by that yellow dotted line. And that yellow dotted line is going through the front parking available to that building, and we are closing a driveway. So what are some potential issues that we should be aware of? Well, obviously, we've got a loss of parking. Brings up a question. The parking that remains, is it adequate or inadequate for the 5 commercial strip center places? There's a loss of direct access to the state route. Internal circuity is altered because we're closing a driveway. The way people go in and out of the property changes. There's a potential change of intensity of highest and best use. Will it still be a commercial strip center? Will you still be able to have 5 units in that commercial strip center? Will the type of users in that commercial strip center change and pay lower rent or higher rent or the same rent? The way one should look at the complexity or to make a determination regarding the complexity is to first look at the whole property before the taking based on its highest and best use, ignoring project influence. Well, in this case, we have a 5-unit retail commercial strip center. It's got 45 parking spaces. It's fully leased. It has small retail users, including a pizza shop, a hair salon, a pet store. It has direct access to the state route, and it also has a secondary access to a side street. There's no issues. The property functions well. Land value is approximately $8 a square foot, and the improvements rent at plus or minus $8.50 per square foot on a net basis. Now let's take a look at what the taking is. We know the taking is WL. That means that we are taking fee simple and we are taking all access rights along with that WL taking. So the primary access to the state route is severed. Access is now only to the secondary local street. There's a loss of parking spaces. Internal circuity and stacking may be a problem. Residue site no longer conforms to zoning or occupancy standards. Parking may be inadequate for the existing retail uses. So now let's look at the residue as severed and uncured based on its highest and best use, assuming the project is completed. So the highest and best use may be smaller, low-tier retail, office, commercial uses. Parking probably isn't adequate. Access is to the secondary road only. Vacancy rate may be higher than typical. The residue is a difficult property suffering from functional obsolescence, suffering from internal circuity issues. The land value may have been reduced to $6 a square foot, and the improvements, the rental rate may have fallen to $5.50 a square foot on a net basis. So, conclusion, the valuation problem is determined to be complicated. The residue probably suffers a diminution in value, and that can be measured. For example, if the land value before was $8 a square foot and the residue, it's now $6 a square foot, there's a diminution or a loss of $2 a square foot in land. And building, before it rented at $8.50 a square foot. Now for the residue, it's renting at $5.50 a square foot. That's a diminution or loss of $3 a square foot. An improper appraisal scoping checklist would just conclude this, that the valuation problem is complicated. What checklists need is the reasoning and support, which is outlined in those red dashed lines. That whoever is analyzing the problem needs to put adequate support so that an average reader understands what the valuation issues are as a result of the taking. All right, let's look at the next slide. So we've just gone over what is a complicated valuation problem. Let's discuss what is an uncomplicated valuation problem. The appraisal valuation problem is considered simplistic or uncomplicated when it is apparent the residue suffers no distinguishable diminution or loss in the value as a result of the severance of the part taken from the whole property. The part taken is nominal, and the impact to the residue caused by the taking is also nominal. So, brings up another question. What is apparent the residue suffers no distinguishable diminution in value? Let's look at the next slide. And here is that example. What we're looking at is a single-family residential dwelling in a rural area. The property sits on a small acreage tract. The home is pretty far removed from the road, and we have a small strip take. That yellow line indicates the strip take, and the property rights that we're taking as a standard highway easement. So how would we go about analyzing this to determine whether the valuation problem is complicated or uncomplicated? Again, first we look at the whole property before the taking based on its highest and best use, ignoring project influence. In this case, we have a single-family residential property. It's in an area where there's no zoning classification. It's a rural area of mixed residential, small commercial, and agricultural properties. The detached garage with a residential drive has direct access to the state route, and the house is set back approximately 100 feet from the existing right-of-way. No issues, property functions well, land is valued at $20,000 an acre plus or minus, and the improvements are valued at $40 a square foot plus or minus. The taking is an SH, which is a standard highway easement, with a small T directly behind the SH easement. Access to the state route remains about the same. The drive is reconstructed by the project. The SH take is about 10 feet wide along the street frontage. The structure is 95 feet from the new right-of-way. Minor site improvements are in the take area. There's a wider ditch in front of the property. And so now let's analyze the residue as severed and uncured based on its highest and best use, assuming the project is completed. All right, the highest and best use is still single-family residential in a mixed residential commercial area. The residue has access to the state route as it did before. Proximity to the new right-of-way limits does not appear to be an issue. No apparent functional obsolescence issues are noted for the residue. Land value is still valued at $20,000 an acre plus or minus. The improvements are still valued at $40 a square foot plus or minus. So in conclusion, the valuation problem is determined to be uncomplicated. The residue suffers no apparent diminution in value. And again, that can really be measured. Land value before was $20,000 an acre. The residue was $20,000 an acre. So there's no loss. There is no diminution in value. Same with the building or property value at $40 a square foot in the before, $40 a square foot in the after, no loss. Therefore, what you could have done with the property before the take, you can also do with the property after the take. It's a nominal taking. All right, so let's get on with the second purpose of the checklist, which is develop the scope of work needed for the valuation problem based on the complexity of the valuation problem. The scope of work will be the selection of the proper valuation format and then adherence to the procedures governing that particular valuation format. And then 2, complying with any agreed on instructions that may be detailed in the scoping checklist. An example would be the appraiser needs to prove or disprove that there is a diminution in value resulting from right-of-way limits moving 20 foot closer to the residential home on the residue property. That's an example of what a detailed instruction could be. Finally, the third purpose of the checklist is to assure the appraisals and valuations ODOT receives are relevant to its program needs by doing the following. We're going to use the appraisal scoping checklist on all valuations prepared for ODOT highway projects. When we've created procedures for appraisal and appraisal review that implement the federal and state laws and regulations, and we use knowledgeable people to assess the complexity of the valuation problem. The checklist is a collaboratively completed with the district real estate administrator, the appraiser, and the review appraiser, if there is a review appraiser on this parcel. The agency prepares the draft. Then a meeting occurs at the project site with the appraiser, the reviewer, and the agency. Then the agency prepares the final checklist that's modified to reflect comments from that on-site meeting. All right, it is now time for a knowledge check.